Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the topic of polytheism. With me is P. Sufenas Virius Lupus, who is a practicing polytheist, a scholar and author. His books include A Serpent Path Primer and Ephesia Grammata, Ancient History and Modern Practice. He is also known by his legal name of Phillip Bernhardt-House. Under that name, he teaches in the Social Studies Department of Skagit Community College in Whidbey Island, Washington, and is the author of Werewolves, Magical Hounds, and Dog-Headed Men in Celtic Literature. Welcome, Lupus. Catholicism is considered a monotheistic religion, part of the Abrahamic tradition, and yet there's a Catholic Trinity. God has three persons already, and then a panoply of saints.
Right.
And it seems to me that the Catholic saints are not really in actual practice much different than the devas and deities of polytheistic practice, and in fact, as you know, the African and the African diaspora religions, they often syncretized their deities with the Catholic saints.
That's exactly it. I mean, from a religious studies and an anthropological and a methodological viewpoint, the cultus to a saint is no different than the cultus to a hero, a deity, an orisha, and so on and so forth in the many different systems that exist. And in fact, I would say a lot of the folk Catholic practices in many different European cultures are carryovers of whatever polytheism they used to do. So Ireland, for example, or even Italy. Italian Catholic practices, and particularly Sicilian Catholic practices, bring in all sorts of other influences. And it's often just a very light coating of Christian frosting on a kind of polytheist cake, so to speak.
Well, if we look at all of human history, modern humans have been on this planet, let's say at least 40,000 years, probably longer.
Right.
And we know that the monotheistic religions, the Abrahamic tradition, goes back at most, let's say, 4,000 years. So for 90% of human history, polytheism in its various forms, animism, and so on, was the norm.
Well, I would say it doesn't even quite go back that far, because when Judaism emerges kind of as we know it now, well, that's that happens in the early centuries CE.
Yeah.
But post-Babylonian exile Judaism wasn't monotheistic, it was henotheistic, right?
What does that mean?
So henotheism essentially means that it recognizes there's many deities, but that particular religion only worships one. So the way that it's phrased in the Ten Commandments is not, there is only one God. It says, I, the Lord, am your God, worship no gods but me, for I am a jealous God. What is there to be jealous of if he's the only one?
Yeah.
So that's very definitely henotheism. I would say even early Christianity was monolatrous henotheism in Trinitarian form. It really is only with the emergence of Islam that you get hard monotheism of there is one, there is only one, and there can only ever be one, and everything else is either false or demons or jinn.
Well, there you go. You've got the demons, you've got the jinn.
Yeah, so there's other powers.
In Islam.
Yeah.
And of course, you have the Sufis who have attempted in many ways to reconnect with some of these older traditions.
Right, which is one of the reasons, unfortunately, why a lot of Sufis are persecuted in certain forms, in certain places of modern Islam. they are very open to syncretism.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of their practices in places like Pakistan and so forth draw heavily on Indian traditions.
Yeah. Let's define syncretism.
Right. So the dictionary definition that you often find, which I don't like very much, but we'll start there, is the combination of different, and it often says contradictory systems, particularly of religion or philosophy. The way that I like to think of it is there's kind of two forms of syncretism. There's a methodological form where you get a combination of two different religious cultures, two or more different religious cultures. And so aspects of certain practices or names of deities or things like that get interchanged within a particular cultural matrix.
Mm-hmm.
The other kind that I would define is theological syncretism, and that is where a deity name from one culture is then linked to a deity name from another culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Zeus Amun was the oracle, the deity at an oracle in Egypt.
Yes, when the Greeks conquered Egypt, they sort of fused their pantheons.
Right, and even before the Ptolemies and Alexander the Great and so forth came in,
mm-hmm.
there were already the beginnings of that.
Mm-hmm.
There were several emporium cities in Egypt, like Naucratis, that were specifically designed to facilitate Greek-Egyptian interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And, we go back to Plato and Pythagoras and many of the great Greek philosophers, and they were all said to have had some connection to or study abroad experiences, if you like, in Egypt.
Mm-hmm. Well, one important distinction then between polytheism and monotheistic practice is that almost by definition, polytheists are open to other cultures. They see the deities of other cultures as more or less akin to their own pantheons, and there's no limit to how many deities a polytheist might acknowledge.
Yes, that's true. And some polytheists these days anyway, and very likely in the past as well, might say, okay, well, this deity in this culture is really this deity.
Mm-hmm.
And that, certainly a lot of people still do that. It makes the overall number of deities more manageable.
Well, let me ask you this question. As a psychologist, I have sort of a leaning toward the work of Carl Jung. And I'm pretty sure Jung would say, looking back at the polytheistic religions, that these are all projections from the human psyche. They are archetypal energies. We're not really talking about autonomous entities, except to the extent that archetypes themselves function autonomously within the collective unconscious.
Right. Well, from the modern polytheist viewpoint,
Mm-hmm.
We understand deities, spirits, heroes, etc., whatever their classification is, to be independent, individual, volitional, non-corporeal beings.
Mm-hmm.
Archetypes are something that come into the picture, but oftentimes, think of it this way. If you are dealing with Zeus, and you say, oh, well, there's a thunder god in another culture and his name is Thor. Or there's a head of pantheon deity in another culture and his name is Baal. You can kind of look at those archetypal jobs, but that doesn't actually get you into relationship with the deity. That's what modern polytheists are interested in, is developing relationships.
A personal relationship.
Right.
Much the way a Christian might want to have a personal relationship with Christ.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Or to put it in kind of entirely human terms that everyone can probably understand, you could go to your corner drugstore and deal with pharmacist.
Yeah.
But it's much nicer to deal with, George Jones, who has 3 children and enjoys cricket games and that kind of a thing. That's where the real connections come in. It's some people in modern polytheism and in modern paganism and so forth do deal with deities on a strictly archetypal level. I would consider myself being kind of a mega polytheist. The more poly, the better. I consider archetypes to be a whole other class of divine beings.
Okay.
So they just the feature of them is that they are a role rather than an individual personality. You can relate to the role. You can get a lot out of relating to the role. And the role can syncretize with other types of deities. So Father God could be Zeus. Thunder God could also be Zeus. Mother Goddess could be any number of things, any number of goddesses from a number of cultures. What those do, this is I think one of the major disagreements that a lot of modern polytheists would have with Jungians and Joseph Campbell and various others, is that it's the particularity. It's the individual characteristics that really are what you build a relationship on, just as with any human relationship.
Well, if we look at the history of religions, particularly in Western culture, one of the things that is almost overwhelmingly obvious is that when a monotheistic religion takes over, it attempts to wipe out the polytheistic cultures that may have existed earlier, and at the same time incorporates some of the shrines, some of the practices, but at the same time makes a point of insisting that those deities are really demonic.
Right. There's various approaches. In medieval Ireland, for example, you get the demonizing approach of all of those things that people used to worship here are actually demons. You get also in certain Irish texts, they say, well, they're actually fallen angels of a particular kind that aren't quite demonic. Some of them even say they are humans that were not subject to the fall, who then kind of became euhemerized.
What does that mean?
So euhemerism is named after a Greek philosopher called Euhemerus, who essentially posited that all of the deities were just really exceptional humans whose names and deeds then became more and more mythic and cosmic after their deaths. So Zeus was not necessarily a deity, he was just a great king.
Well, there certainly are known examples, like Imhotep in Egypt, who was a great founder of the mystery schools and an architect, as I recall, became deified.
Right, yes, and apotheosis is a whole other section of this, because I'm in particular very focused on a deified human. And it's not unusual. The deified ruler cults of Egypt, Rome, and various other places, including modern Japan. The emperor in Japan derives his power from descent from Amaterasu Omikami, and he's the only person within the culture who can perform certain rituals within Shinto. That was true of rulers in many different polytheistic and animistic cultures. They were not always primarily political or military or governmental figures. They had a specific sacred religious role.
And even today, I was in Cambodia not long ago. The king of Cambodia spends, I gather, most of his time engaged in religious ritual.
Yeah, it's something that continues to this very day. And of course, a lot of people have bad ideas about this, because one example of a divine ruler and that everyone seems to resent in the U.S. would be Kim Jong-Un, who is said to be divine in this same kind of a way. It's interesting how it works out in communist countries. So that's a whole other topic. But so it is something that continues. The head of state role that many governmental figures play, from our president to the Queen of England. The Queen of England is also the head of the Church of England. Exactly. Yeah. So it's something that's not entirely gone from our culture. And it's not, as a result, I think, as foreign as a lot of people would think it is. It's hard to imagine Gerald Ford being a divine ruler, for example, for many people. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with Gerald Ford, but just...
Or even Nero, going back to ancient times.
Right, and Nero is one that they love to pick on. There have been various academic attempts recently to, I wouldn't say rehabilitate Nero, but be a little bit fairer to him, because in Christianity he gets a very bad name. But for a good bit of the early part of his reign, he was considered quite a good ruler.
Well, yes, the first 5 years of Nero's reign, when the philosopher Seneca was largely in charge of the Roman Empire, is considered the Silver Age.
Right.
Of Rome. So there's something to be said for that. Seneca wrote a book upon the death of the Emperor Claudius. Right. It was a satire. I think the title is the Apocalypsis of Claudius, and it's about how Claudius goes to heaven expecting to be revered as a god, but is confronted with all of his sins.
Right, and this is something that comes up in a lot of, you could say, satirical literature later in Rome. So, for example, Lucian of Samosata wrote a book, one of his books, on various different divine emperors coming into Olympus, and then there's a little commentary by a couple of deities saying, oh, well, that one was a big screw up, and oh, he's already looking for a new boyfriend, and that sort of a thing. So it was something that the Romans and the Greeks and so forth during the Roman Empire didn't necessarily take entirely seriously, but some emperors fared better than others.
Well, I think it's important to realize that in ancient Rome and in ancient India as well, there were schools of materialist philosophy that evolved out of the polytheistic culture.
Right. This is, I think, one of the very interesting things about philosophy in general. Within a polytheist context, we often get taught in history of religions, for example, which has been done with both deliberate and unconscious biases toward monotheism. That when the philosophical revolution happened, when the axial age happened, not only in Greece, Rome, and so forth, but also in India.
The axial age being around 500 BC.
Right, yeah, about, you could say 700 to about 300.
Where you have many, many great religious teachers and prophets from Zoroaster and Buddha and Akhenaten and so forth, the Hebrew prophets.
Right, yeah. I mean, there were all kinds of things going on during that period. One of the things that is forgotten in presenting this material now is it's often said that the Greek philosophers were the first ones to question the gods. And on further reflection, that's not necessarily the case. All of the major ancient Greek philosophers were polytheists. It's just that their particular theology of the gods differed. And it could range from anything from materialism up to, very kind of highfalutin, I wouldn't say anti-materialism, but transcendentalism to various extents that you find in Platonism and Pythagoreanism, expressing everything as number and so forth. So, there was a great deal of diversity there in terms of thought and how this intersected with physical sciences and so forth as well, but none of them really said there are no gods. Sometimes they said the gods can't do anything, or the gods aren't accessible, as to an extent some Epicureans and others said, but none of them said there weren't gods.
Well, one of the things that I admire the most about polytheistic traditions, it was pointed out to me by one of my mentors, Gene Houston, that there's much more of a sense of richness in the psyche of people who practice polytheism, an acknowledgement of the diverse energies, archetypes, if you will, within the human psyche, whereas in the monotheistic traditions, it's almost as if your interior life is a little more black and white.
Yeah, I would say that's true. I mean, even in discussing, since we're mentioning psychology, we tend to talk about soul. Mm-hmm. And in many polytheistic and animistic cultures, it's not soul, it's souls, or their soul parts. Mm-hmm. And the fates of them after death can be quite different.
Like I think the ancient Egyptians had at least a dozen.
Oh, yeah, mm-hmm. yeah, and they weren't the only ones. Mm-hmm. Kind of more spare systems might be able to reduce it down to 3. Some ancient Greek philosophers, including Aristotle, said there was the vegetable soul, the animal soul, and the rational soul. Mm. And the vegetable soul and the animal soul got recycled, but the rational soul, which was the thing that made you most human and was also individual to you, mm-hmm. that might go to a semi-permanent afterlife of some type or another. So there's a broad range of things available in terms of how polytheism works out, and in terms of how the diversity in it that's inherent in it applies to everything. Mm-hmm. As a polytheist, I can't assume that a deity I'm dealing with is just like what I've read about. Likewise, I can't ever assume that humans everywhere work in the same way, and so in both cases, I have to get to know them individually. I have to ask questions. I have to understand their context. And in that way, I think my own engagement with people in general, mm-hmm. But also with deities certainly, is that much richer. You can appreciate that many more dimensions of a personality and so forth mm-hmm. When you approach it from that angle, as opposed to, well, there's really only one thing you can be, or there's only one thing that this person or that deity is for me and to me.
I suppose, in summary, it's fair to say about you as a practicing polytheist that you have a personal relationship with more than one deity.
Yes, definitely. I would say on a regular basis, I am in contact with around 60 to 100. There's about 30 that I'm quite close to, and there's about 6 to 10 that I'm very, very close to and have dealings with on a daily basis.
Well, P. Sufenas Virius Lupus, it's been a great pleasure having this conversation with you. It's been delightful and enlightening.
Thank you so much. This has been a great deal of fun for me as well.
Thank you, and thank you for being with us.